Hello, ladies. Mind if I sit down?
Oh, I wish you could, but we're being joined in just a second.
A scene from Feud, Capote versus the Swans. It's the miniseries about Truman Capote and his very rich, very fashionable female friends he called his Swans. The cast is led by Tom Hollander as Truman Capote and Naomi Watts as his numero uno swan, Babe Paley. The series is adapted from the nonfiction book Capote's Women by writer Laurence Leamer. Let's meet the author on The Hollywood Beat. Larry, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. I have so enjoyed reading your books. I started on Hitchcock's Blondes, your latest book, last night, but we're mainly speaking now about Capote's Women, on which the miniseries Feud, Capote versus the Swans, was based. I want to ask you first, what drew you to this particular dichotomy, Truman Capote and his Swans? What interested you?
Well, I don't think of myself as a traditional biographer, but as a storyteller. And this is a great story. And Truman Capote was a great writer, and it's a tragic story, but it's got a lot of glamour in it. It's got so many different elements. I just was fascinated by it.
Well, I can certainly understand that. You and I spoke on the phone yesterday, and I told you then that I have always considered Capote one of the, if not the best American writer of contemporary times. He was so gifted, and In Cold Blood was such a masterpiece of narrative nonfiction. I got my MFA in creative nonfiction from Goucher College, and we were told it was the first nonfiction novel. Whether that's true or not, the success of it certainly elevated it to that level. Would you agree?
Well, first of all, this little gay man head out to the Midwest, okay? The people he didn't know, he'd never met in his life, and that was daring enough. The subject was daring enough. There's this little story in the New York Times. He invented true crime. He invented true crime as a whole genre, which is now kind of debased, but he invented it.
If he had not taken Harper Lee with him, I wonder how much inroads he would have gotten, because she was so earthy. And
I wouldn't say earthy, but she was like them. She was a small town girl, and she was more traditional, and so she could identify with them, and they could identify with her, which they sure couldn't with Truman.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he was quite the character, but it was a kernel of as you say, a news story he happened to see, and he noticed in that story that it had the makings of a profound book.
No, he didn't know that right away. No, he went out to do a profile for the New Yorker.
Oh, that's right.
He then realized this is a book.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot that. You're entirely correct on that. Truman Capote was, you know what? First of all, for people who may not have read your book, or who may not have seen the miniseries, let's tell folks who are watching or listening what the miniseries and the book is about in a nutshell.
Well, after he wrote in Cold Blood, which was an enormous bestseller, just incredibly rave reviews. He was looking for something else to do, and he knew these rich women that he called his swans, and he wanted to write a book like Edith Wharton's masterful works about the early 20th, late 19th century America. He wanted to do that, focusing on a lot of these women.
The
So
Age of Innocence.
yes, or the whole series. But he but he spent years he couldn't do it. He was blocked and he couldn't do it for whatever reason.
Do you think he had?
Pretended he did it.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Pretended he lied about it, that he was writing it, but he wasn't writing it. He wrote very little of it. And some people say now that the manuscript was somewhere and got lost. Nonsense. He never wrote it.
There's this thing called writer's block. You're a prolific writer. Do you think there is such a thing?
Oh yeah, I go through it 20 times a day. But look, I wish I'd known Truman because he had that block and he couldn't figure out a way to get around it. And what is a writer's block? What is writing? It's solving one problem after the next. Writer's block is you're solving the wrong problem or you're solving it from the wrong angle. So you got to figure out a different way to solve the problem. If I knew Truman, I'd say, Truman, forget it. It's not going to work out. Go back and write a book about your failure to write this book. That can be your master. That'll open you up. Just do that.
Why do you think it would have been wise for Truman to write about his problems in telling the story?
Because it would end his writer's block. It's what I'm saying. Problem solving. You got this block. You've got this big mountain in front of you. You got to find a way around the mountain. That would be a way around the mountain. It would open him up.
The whole prospect of telling a story about his relationship with these women who were Babe Paley, Lee Radziwill, CZ Guest. Who am I leaving out? Anne Hayward. No, that's not right. And
Marla Agnelli.
Oh, right.
And who else?
Pamela
Harriman.
These were the society grand dames of the age, right? And
right, of a different age when that mattered in a different way. But women didn't have women weren't going to work, and these women were celebrated. There were columns across America where they wrote about these women and the clothes they wore, and people identified with them and wanted to know everything about them.
They were ladies who lunched.
Right.
And married well.
No, but I don't think that's quite. They were beyond. These are the ultra. These are the swans. There weren't 10 women in the world that would qualify for this. Okay, because they had to be beautiful. They had to be sophisticated. They had to have a kind of social savvy. They had to dress well and spend a fortune on clothes. Had to have all these categories to be one of his swans.
He picked this story that he wanted to tell in novel form, and he wanted to call it Answered Prayers.
Right.
Tell me what that means. I know it.
Well, it came from a famous, I can't get the saint's name, but that there's nothing worse than getting what you want. Basically, that's
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, exactly.
And Gerald Clark wrote a biography, the definitive biography of Truman Capote, and Truman showed Gerald a chapter of this proposed book, and you write that he was underwhelmed, but he also told Capote that he didn't think it was a good idea to write about these women.
Well, these women would be upset by it. And let me say something else about that. A lot of authors in that situation wouldn't have the guts to do that. They had a relationship with this person, and they wouldn't want to maybe alienate him. But Clark had the guts to tell him this, to tell him the truth. I mean, he was a good human being and not just a good author. And he wrote the definitive biography.
And it was a shame that Truman did not heed his warning because Truman wound up becoming a social pariah, did he not?
He did. And drinking to excess and taking drugs to excess.
Such a squandered talent and an even more squandered life. But let's talk about some of the positives of Capote. His background, his childhood, his early upbringing was very sad.
Right. But I think you'll find many authors have sad childhoods. That's not unique. What's unique is he comes to New York. He never graduates, really doesn't get much of a high school education, doesn't go to college, and he writes a novel, and at the age of 23, he's already celebrated.
He tested off the charts when they did standardized testing, if I remember correctly, and knew from day one that he wanted to be a writer.
Right.
The strange thing about it is that he lived next door to Harper Lee's
Right.
family. And what are the odds that two kids from a very small town, Monroeville, Alabama, would wind up becoming two of the most celebrated writers of the 20th century?
And both of them were doing this when they were very young. And I think that's an important point because so many people say they want to be writers. They don't want to be writers. They want to have written. They wanted to be doing what I'm doing right now. They don't want to sit in front of the computer day after day. But Truman, from an early age, what is it? Writer has to be observant, incredibly observant, and Truman was from day one.
A curious,
Yeah.
very curious person. I think I told you this, but I remember going to Monroeville from the little town of Atmore, Alabama, where I taught English. And I drove up to visit my Uncle Shorty, and whose name was Artist Vardaman Culpepper. You talk about
Right.
Old South, and his wife, Bessie Ray, was an old vaudevillian. And I was there one weekend, and she's ironing a shirt and smoking a cigarette and says that Nell Harper is in town this week visiting her sister Alice. And I was freaking out because I wanted to meet Harper Lee because I was teaching To Kill a Mockingbird to my students. And she said, "Oh, no, child, we don't do that." But they were very protective of Truman and Harper Lee. Small southern towns are like that. Did you get to Monroeville by any
No, I
chance?
didn't. No, I wrote this. I wrote this during the pandemic, and
Oh,
I wasn't able to leave my house. The New York Public Library, which has Truman's papers, that was closed to me. The Library of Congress, who had several significant collections, I couldn't get there. I couldn't go to Europe to do interviews. I was very limited in how I wrote this book.
you managed to write that and not be able to leave your house.
Right.
Amazing. How did that was a quick turnaround? You wrote the book, and then we've already had the TV program produced.
Well, that rarely happens. That they'll buy it, and it really happens this quickly. But uh, Robin Batts, who's the screenwriter, he read the book, and he gave it to Ryan Murphy, who's like the king of long form television now, or long form streaming, and he liked it, so they optioned it, and they made it right away. And they did a brilliant job. I don't totally disagree with parts of it, but I agree with the artistic daring of the entire production. They spent $80 million not doing a paint by number TV show. It was very daring.
That's quite a budget
Yeah.
for something of this nature. You have had other books optioned before, so
And
you
almost everything option. I've had some books optioned 3 or 4 times, but nothing's ever been made. And that's common experience, believe me.
You've been quite a prolific writer. How many books have you written?
20.
20.
Yeah.
What most interests you about Truman Capote that surprised you?
I just kept wanting him to do better. It wasn't that. I could please Truman. Can't you get over this? Can't you do this? You're so magnificently talented. You've got so much, you've got a life ahead of you. What you can do, Truman, with your life. Don't do this. I kept saying this to myself all during the writing. I was so sorry for him. And the ending is, it's not upbeat really, but it says that people probably remember his books forever.
He had a difficult relationship, to say the least, with his mother,
Right,
which comes out in your book and
right.
also in the miniseries. How do you think that influenced his attraction to and relationship with his swans?
His mother was a social wannabe. That she came to New York, she married this accountant, and they pretended they had money they didn't have, and they'd become part of cafe society in New York, which you could get into cafe if you just had money. You're part of your card. You went to the restaurants, you paid your way to these parties, and they were part of it until it was discovered that he was embezzling to have this lifestyle, and he spent time in Sing Sing. So she was a pretender. And these women were not pretenders. That was the major difference. These women were the real thing. His mother wasn't.
Babe Paley, the wife of William Paley, who was the founder of CBS, was his numero uno swan. What was it about her that so fascinated Truman?
I mean, she was often said to be the most beautiful woman in the world, but it was an illusion. She wore false teeth. She got up in the morning and she slept in a separate room from her husband. She saw nobody without her makeup on. And when she went out, she was creating an illusion for the world, which she did brilliantly.
That had to be exhausting.
I'm sure it was.
And the other women in that orbit were each brought something different with them. I read that you said that Lee Radziwill, who, well, you tell us, who exactly was she and what made her so close to Truman?
Well, first of all, she was Jackie Kennedy's sister, President Kennedy's wife's sister, okay? And she was immensely jealous of Jackie. And that was the key of her life, her jealousy for her sister. She was married to a fallen Polish prince. She had a lot of money, but she was consumed with the jealousy to Jackie and putting Jackie down. And I didn't like her. I just didn't like her. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm writing some people you just don't like. I didn't like that part of her. And Truman befriended her and put down Jackie. Part of that friendship meant he had to put Jackie down, which he did publicly, including in answered prayers. Said she looked like a man.
Who looked like a man?
Ja-
Jackie?
Jackie.
That's I don't
That might not be
remember.
an insult today, but it definitely was then.
No kidding. Well, but there is sibling rivalry is nothing new, but you look at Lee and Jackie, whose maiden name was Bouvier,
Right.
and they came from a very patrician background. They had what did they have a privileged
Well, not her,
child?
not her father. I mean, Black Jack Bouvier was a kind of womanizing drunk and didn't have much money. But
Oh,
then she married a rich man.
oh, I'm Austrian. I can't
Oh,
pronounce.
right.
Truman, coming from nowhere, rose to the top of New York society and through this ball that had never been done before and has not been done since. Tell us about the black and white ball.
Well, it's funny. I'm reading Griffin Dunn's memoir now, and I didn't know that, but that the year before, the black and white one, 65, I think it was, Dominic Dunn, who was a friend of mine, his marriage was at the end, and he gave a black and white ball. He took all the furniture out of his house in Beverly Hills, put new furniture in, and did this incredible black and white ball that lasted all night. And Truman was there, and that's where he learned how to do this. So he did it the
Oh,
following year, and he did it at the Plaza Hotel, and it was the party of the century. And earlier this year, in January, end of January, Disney or the production company put on one of the most incredible premieres since Gone with the Wind in 1939. It began for this series. It began at the Museum of Modern Art with a 200 paparazzi and photographs and a screening of the film, and then buses and limos to take people 4 blocks to the Plaza Hotel, where they replicated Truman Capote's ball. Molly
um,
Ringwald.
Molly Ringwald. It was quite a cast. Oh,
Oh, it was
and
unbelievable.
and the guy
Oh,
who
it's funny.
played Truman Capote,
Yeah, brilliantly.
Tom, is it Holland or
Tom Holland.
Hollander?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We've seen three now iterations of Truman Capote on screen. There
Right,
was Philip Seymour Hoffman, Toby Jones,
right.
and now Tom Hollander. I couldn't envision Tom Hollander as Truman Capote until I saw him because he had also played, I think, Tony Blair in some production. And
Well,
I
he was
was,
in the White Lotus. He played the villain in the White Lotus.
that's right. I was so impressed. Did you speak with him?
Oh, of course. Talked to him a lot.
And what did he have to say about
He just
your?
that evening, I just was the quality of these people and the genuineness is not what you think. They aren't these kind of snobbish celebrities. They just were so empathetic. I was so impressed with everybody.
And I imagine they had all read your book.
Of course, they had to read it. I mean, they didn't have
What
to, but of course they read it.
what kind of feedback did you get?
Well, I'm not going to brag here, but they loved it. Obviously, there's some of them said they read it several times.
I can only
Probably their part. I shouldn't read the whole thing several times, but they probably read it. The part that dealt with their character, they probably read.
exactly, exactly. You have written several, uh, several, numerous books. I'm going to refer to my notes here. The Reagans, Johnny Carson, the Kennedys, three on the Kennedys, right?
Yeah, you're forgetting the Kennedy dogs.
You wrote a book about the Kennedy
Not
dogs.
Kennedy. That's to
Arnold
come.
Schwarzenegger. Uh, Here, okay, Madness Under the Royal Palms. I read on your website that it takes place in Palm Beach, and you had written that it was controversial.
Beyond
Why?
controversial. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I don't know why it was controversial. It was the truthful story of that island. People went crazy. Some of them, first of all, it sold unbelievably. There were lines outside the 2 bookstores there. And one bookstore owner told me that saved her store, the number of copies she sold. But people read it with a different cover on it. Because they could,
Re-
because it was because this island is such a fantasy, and finally somebody gets underneath that fantasy, and they didn't like it. I mean, I'm banned the Palm Beach Daily News, which is this pathetic daily that just celebrates all this crap, and I'm banned in all the years since that. My name is not allowed to appear in the paper. When Capote versus the Swans, the two of the Swans lived in Palm Beach, and in the second hour of the show, the Thanksgiving dinner takes place in Palm Beach. But they didn't dare do a story on it because I did a story that had to mention my name.
Well, when I lived in West Palm Beach and worked at Channel 5, which was on Flagler Drive, right there on the Intracoastal, it
Right,
was a hop, skip, and a jump to get to the bridge
right,
that took you from West Palm to Palm Beach.
right,
And at one point, if I remember correctly, there had been a one of those gate things that comes down in the middle of the bridge that would keep you from going across to Palm Beach until the federal government said you can't do this. And as crazy as it was at that time, there was an ordinance, um, a town law that you could not be more than 50 feet from the beach itself and not have a shirt on. So
Exactly.
you couldn't go jogging around the town shirtless. I
And if
mean,
you're black, you better be out of town before it gets dark too.
exactly. And you couldn't spit on the sidewalk.
Right.
It's very strange. I had gone over there for uh, several stories to interview people. I remember when John Lennon was killed, they had a candlelight vigil at his estate there. Uh, and I interviewed George Wallace's wife. I think her name was Cornelia, and I think she had a place there at the time. I don't remember. It's a very strange
Right.
society. Um, you wrote a book called Mar-a-Lago Inside the Gates of Power, and that Trump got so angry with you, he banned you from the club. What about it made Trump so angry?
Who knows? Who knows? One thing his son didn't like, I criticized the food. I said the food wasn't very good. And he didn't like that. Because you go there, you have to say, oh, this is wonderful. You have to stand up when he comes in. You have to say everything is unbelievably great.
You have to stand up when he comes in,
Oh, sure.
like he's still president.
Right.
Unbelievable. You've had quite an interesting life. I went through and made notes here. You were in the Peace Corps in Nepal.
Yes.
What motivated you to do that?
Well, I wanted to go to the Peace Corps, and I found that was the most fascinating country to go. When I was there, it had been closed from the outside world for 500 years. There was only one road that went into the country. And my village was 2 days walk from a road. A tiny, you call it a village. It was hardly a village. It was just it was a little mud hut on the side of the mountains. But I loved it. I had a great 2 years.
And you wrote a book about the head of the Peace Corps there who,
Willie Unseld in 1963 climbed Mount Everest from the West Ridge, one of the great climbs in climbing history, because the other climbers went the old way that Hillary and Tenzing had done 10 years before. He wanted to do something new. He lost 9 of his toes. And he then went back and became one of the founders of Outward Bound and this philosophy that you have to risk yourself to be real. And then when he was in his 50s, he decided he'd lived long enough. He wanted to go over to Nanda Devi, the mountain in India. He wanted his daughter. He named his daughter Nanda Devi. He wanted to lead his daughter up to the top of that mountain. That would be the highest woman ever climbed. And then he wanted to let himself die on the side of the mountain. But he got over there, and he decided he wanted to live. But his daughter got sick, and she died. And they grasped hands around the body, and he gave a prayer to this world of such beauty and fragility that even my daughter's death does not deny my philosophy. And then he started giving these talks all around the United States about his daughter's death. And the people who weren't climbers thought, oh, this is incredible. What a brave man. People who knew climbing thought the guy was in trouble. He then was teaching at Evergreen College in what state of Washington, Olympia, and he said anybody could do anything. So these students were going to climb Mount Rainier around in December, and they weren't prepared. They went up, and they had to, because the weather turned by, they had to come down a direct route called Cadaver Gap. An avalanche came down, and he was killed, and one of the students was killed. So it's quite a strong. Robert Redford optioned for a movie.
crazy. People who, I have this thing about people who are drawn toward extreme risk. And I don't understand that psychology. It eludes me. You worked in a coal mine
Yeah.
and you wrote about that.
But you know what? Let me tell you something. I didn't write it in the first person because I thought I'd come in there for a couple of months. So am I. These guys are spending their whole lives there. So I'll tell the story of what it's like to be a miner, a young miner, but I'm not going to put it in the first person.
So how did you approach that?
Just what it was like to be a miner. But you're reading the piece, didn't even know that I'd been in the mine.
Interesting. You, I think this is nuts. You wrote about the war in Bangladesh.
Spent six weeks there.
It, are you risk averse?
I don't think I actively. I'm not afraid of risk. I'll put it that way.
I guess not. You went to Peru and you met a drug dealer and wrote a novel about it. Tell me
I
about
knew
that.
one of the I knew one of the biggest drug dealers, and I knew the DA guy that was trying to get him. The drug dealer came from an elite family. In fact, the drugs were kept in a house right next to the foreign ministers, and the DA guy was this working class guy, very idealistic, and he wanted to get these people. So I wrote a novel. It's also about a television journalist trying to do that. It wasn't a very good novel, unfortunately.
Now, why did you write a novelization of that experience instead of writing a narrative nonfiction
Good
book?
question. Because I wrote an article, first of all, I was writing for Harper's Magazine, and I couldn't sell. Nobody was interested. It was too early. I mean, unfortunately, it's a matter of timing. You've got to be at the right place at the right time. And I was too early telling that story.
Today,
I'd be too late.
perhaps
Yeah.
the cartels, I mean, to come across someone who's in a cartel now and you're a gringo is pretty much no-win situation.
Well,
We,
it was a more innocent age, I must say. It
I
was
guess
dangerous.
so.
It was dangerous, but it wasn't, you know,
I can't imagine befriending a drug dealer. That series Narco, or is
yeah,
it
yeah,
Narcos? Anyway, uh, the whole the violence, and then there was Griselda uh, that came out this last year.
right, right, right.
I can't imagine willingly going into that situation. So you go where angels fear to tread. Your latest book is Hitchcock's Blondes.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Well, that's another great story. This man who's obsessed with blonde actresses. So tell the story of his life. Basically, I'm writing a trilogy. Okay, it's about creative geniuses and the women around them. So that's what Truman Capote was. That's what Capote's Women was, and that's what Hitchcock's Blondes is. And that also has been optioned by Ryan Murphy for a movie, for a series.
So we can look forward to that in the next
Fingers
year.
crossed. Fingers crossed. It's not certain, but hope.
Well, casting that will be interesting.
Yeah.
And then you've got another one you told me about that's coming out.
Third part. That won't be coming out until next May. But in fact, I hope to get the edits back later today. It's Warhol's Muses, about the women around Andy Warhol, and it is a stunning dark tale that's going to change the way people think about Andy Warhol. I guarantee you.
How so?
Because I have all these intimate tapes of him, and we see what goes on inside their world. It's just stunning.
You said that you were researching Capote's women during the pandemic.
Right.
How long did it take you to research that before you actually started writing the book?
I don't remember that, but probably I wrote it quite quickly, probably in a year and a half. That's short time for me.
Wait, from the time you started researching it to the time you finished writing it was a year and a half?
Yeah.
Typically, how long does it take?
Depends what it is. I mean, my book, The Kennedy Women, which is a 900-page book, which was my most successful book, it was the number 2 New York Times bestseller. That took 5 years.
900 pages?
Yeah. I mean, today it wouldn't be published, but it was #2 bestseller.
Why would it not be published today?
Because publishers think that, rightfully so, the attention span isn't there anymore for most people.
Interesting. I would probably be on board for a long time. I hate to finish a book. When I get to the end of a book, I feel this kind of loss. Now, okay, now what can I go on to?
Don't start Kennedy Women.
Now I'm definitely going to read that. I just bought Hitchcock's Blondes. How long did that take to research?
About 2 years.
2 years. And to write it?
Well, together, writing and research.
Oh,
Yeah.
from beginning to end.
And of course, most people were dead, so I didn't have too many great interviews.
Well, there you go. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to mention?
No, this is just fine. It's very interesting talking to you.
I really appreciate it. Larry, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Talk to you again.